I can still taste the bitter coffee I was drinking when I heard the words that changed everything. It was a late afternoon in May. The sun streamed through the windows of my apartment in Venice, the very apartment I had bought after 30 years of hard work, saving every dime, sacrificing vacations and dreams. The coffee cup was half empty when my only son Michael and his wife Christine walked in with a folder of documents. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I remember his smile. It wasn't a smile of affection, but the kind that precedes a calculated victory. "Mom, I brought the deed papers for you to sign," he said, setting the folder on the coffee table as if they were just trivial papers. But we both knew what they meant. It was my apartment, my security, everything I had built being transferred into his name. "It's for your protection," he'd been saying for months. "At your age, it's better to have everything organized." At my age, as if being 68 meant I was incapable, as if the wrinkles on my face erased decades of experience and intelligence. As I signed each page, I noticed the anxious look on Christine's face, watching every movement of my pen like a hawk. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder that afternoon, each tick marking the end of an era in my life. What they didn't know was that behind the facade of a sweet retired teacher, there was a woman who had worked for decades as an investigator specializing in financial crimes. A woman who had learned to read people, to detect lies, to anticipate betrayals. My real career had always been a well-kept secret, shielded by a seemingly ordinary life. I signed the last page and handed the documents to Michael. That's when it happened. It was as if a switch had been flipped and his mask fell away. He put the papers in the folder, stood up, and with a look I'll never forget, said the words that still echo in my mind during sleepless nights. "Get out of my life, old lady. I don't need you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Christine didn't show surprise, only a slight smirk confirming her complicity. It was clear this wasn't an impulse, but something planned, discussed between them, and long awaited. My own son, the one I'd rocked on feverish nights, for whom I'd paid for the best education possible, to whom I'd given everything a mother could give, was discarding me like a useless object. "Michael," I started to say, but he was already walking toward the door. There was no remorse in his eyes, only impatience. "The apartment is mine now. You have 1 week to get out," he said, as if talking to a stranger. "You can go to that house in Reseda. It's more than enough for you." The house in Reseda, a small property I'd inherited from my parents, where I stored old memories in dusty boxes. For him, it was the perfect place to hide an elderly mother, far from the eyes of the society he now frequented. When the door closed, leaving me alone in the living room, I didn't cry. Something inside me had been expecting this. In recent years, I'd noticed the small signs, the increasingly rare visits, and always with some financial interest at their core. The short holiday phone calls, the way Michael would glance through my documents when he thought I wasn't looking. What he didn't know was that I already had a plan. 6 months earlier, when I started receiving strange documents in my name, bank accounts I'd never opened, investment portfolios I'd never created, I began to investigate discreetly. As a professional, I knew exactly what to look for. Hidden cameras I installed in the apartment revealed Michael copying my personal documents and using my social security number for transactions I knew nothing about. That night, after he'd left, I picked up the phone and called my old colleague and neighbor from the building, David Miller. He did exactly what we had planned. "She's calm," he said with a calm that would have surprised Michael if he could have heard me. "Activate the plan." In the following days, I pretended to be devastated. I began packing a few things, as if I were truly preparing to leave the apartment. Michael only showed up once with a moving truck to take the furniture he wanted for his new place. The best pieces, of course. He didn't say another word beyond what was necessary. Christine didn't even bother to show up. Sarah, my 15-year-old granddaughter, came to visit me, sneaking away from her parents. "Grandma, I don't understand why Dad's doing this," she said with tears in her eyes. I hugged her tight, feeling her fragile body trembling. "Some people only understand the value of something when they lose it, darling. But don't you worry about me. Grandma knows how to take care of herself better than you can imagine." The day before I was supposed to leave the apartment, I had a visit from Dr. Laura Mendez. To the world, she was my lawyer. In reality, she was a former Federal Bureau of Investigation colleague with whom I had worked on dozens of financial fraud cases. We reviewed every detail of our plan over tea on the balcony, overlooking the Venice Sea that Michael would soon believe belonged to him. "Everything is ready, Eleanor," Laura said, showing me documents on her tablet. "The trap is set. Now we just have to wait for him to fall into it." "How long?" I asked, pouring more tea. 6 months, tops. We're monitoring all the accounts, all the transactions. Every misstep is being recorded. The U.S. Attorney's Office is already involved." That night, I slept in the apartment for the last time, or so Michael thought. I looked at every corner, at every memory imprinted on the walls, the spot where Michael had taken his first steps, the corner of the living room where we'd celebrated his college acceptance, the kitchen where I had prepared so many Sunday lunches that had grown rarer over the years. The next morning, I left with only 2 suitcases. I left the keys with the doorman, Mr. Rodriguez, as Michael had instructed. "Mrs. Johnson, it's a shame you're leaving," said the doorman, who had known me for 2 decades. "We'll miss you." "Don't you worry, Mr. Rodriguez. Sometimes we need to take a step back to move 2 steps forward." He didn't understand what I meant, but he smiled kindly. I took a taxi not to Reseda, as Michael expected, but to Brentwood, where my real residence was. It was a comfortable apartment I had bought in secret years before, foreseeing that this day might come. There, I set up what we called an operations room at the FBI. Computers, documents, and evidence collected daily. In the following months, Michael made no effort to check on me, not a single call, not a single message, as if I had simply ceased to exist. What he didn't know was that every one of his movements was being monitored, every financial operation was being tracked, and every meeting with his accomplices was being recorded. As the days passed, I received constant reports from the team we had formed. We discovered that the scheme was much larger than we had imagined. Michael wasn't just using my name and social security number for a few shady transactions. He was leading a network of real estate frauds that primarily targeted elderly people. Dozens of stories, just like mine, of children taking over the properties of their aging parents, often with much worse consequences. This was no longer just about me. It became a mission. Every new document that came into my hands strengthened my resolve. "This isn't about revenge," I would repeat to David when he worried about my emotional involvement. "This is about justice." I truly wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. Michael's 43rd birthday was approaching. He was planning a big party on a rooftop in Manhattan, inviting important figures from high society, potential investors, and people who would impress his new Venice neighbors. It would be his social crowning. using money from fraud, and the status of my former apartment, it would also be the perfect moment for our counterattack. Invitations for the party had already been sent. Mine, of course, was not among them, but that didn't matter. I would be present in a way Michael could never foresee. The final preparations for our plan were in motion. Every detail was reviewed multiple times. You might be asking yourselves if at any point I hesitated, if a mother's love outweighed my sense of justice. I confess that I did. There were nights when I looked at old photographs. I remembered happy moments. I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, but then I'd remember his words, "Get out of my life, old lady." And I would also remember all the other victims, the elderly people who had lost everything and had no way to defend themselves. People who, unlike me, did not have a past in criminal investigation or connections to the FBI. Wherever you're watching this now, whether in Los Angeles or in some other part of America where stories like this happen every day, if you followed my account this far, know that this story, unfortunately, is more common than we imagine. The small signs that made me suspect something was very wrong started subtly, like raindrops before a storm. Maybe I should have noticed them sooner, but a mother's love has that peculiarity. It always makes us believe in the best version of our children, even when reality shows the opposite. I clearly remember the first time I noticed something strange. It was a Tuesday in the autumn, one of those cloudy days that makes LA feel like a different city. Michael had visited me the day before, something rare since he married Christine. The visit, as always, had a specific purpose. He needed me to sign a power of attorney to resolve matters related to his father's inheritance. I signed without questioning much. My ex-husband, Robert, had passed away 5 years ago, and I thought it was just delayed bureaucracy. The next morning, while organizing some documents on the mahogany desk I had inherited from my grandmother, I noticed that my checkbook was in a different position than where I always left it. It might sound like paranoia for a 68-year-old woman, but old investigator habits never die. For decades, I'd worked by observing patterns, detecting anomalies, noticing when something was out of place. I began to pay closer attention. In the following weeks, I received strange mail, bank statements for accounts I never opened, communications about investments I never made, and even a letter from a notary in Malibu mentioning a property I had supposedly bought. When I called the bank to inquire, I heard a response that began to arouse my suspicions. The lady authorized her son to perform these operations with the power of attorney she sent us. Power of attorney, in the plural, not just the one I had signed recently. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a disturbing puzzle. The increasingly rare visits from Michael and Christine, the Sunday lunches that only happened when they needed something, the persistent questions about my investments, the value of the Venice apartment, and my retirement. I'm becoming paranoid. I tried to convince myself as I prepared chamomile tea in the silent kitchen, but another, stronger voice, the voice of the investigator I was, whispered, "Trust your instincts." The next day, I did something I never imagined I'd do to my own son. I called my best friend and former FBI colleague Marcia Wilson. We met at the Oyster House restaurant in Venice, in the discreet place where we used to discuss cases decades ago. "Eleanor, if you have this suspicion, we need to investigate," she said after hearing my concerns. "You know better than anyone how this type of fraud works. We've seen it hundreds of times." "But we're talking about my son, Marcia," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "And that's precisely why you need to be sure. If you're wrong, great. But if you're right—" She left the phrase hanging in the air while stirring her coffee with a silver spoon. We decided to start a discreet investigation. Marcia contacted some friends who were still active in the bureau, while I discreetly installed security cameras in my apartment. Tiny, almost imperceptible cameras placed strategically in the living room, the office, and the hallway. The truth was not long in coming. The following week, while I was supposedly at physical therapy, a weekly appointment Michael knew well, he showed up at the apartment. He used the key he had for emergencies and went straight to my office. The cameras captured everything, him opening drawers, photographing documents, reviewing folders, and copying my signature on a blank sheet of paper. I watched the images on Marcia's laptop at her house, feeling a mixture of nausea and sadness I had never experienced. Not even in the worst cases I investigated had I felt anything like it. There could still be an explanation, I tried to rationalize as Marcia held my hand. Eleanor, are you seeing what I'm seeing? He's using your identity for some scheme. We need to find out the full extent of this. Reports began to arrive in the following days. Michael had opened 3 bank accounts in my name. There was a power of attorney with my forged signature, giving him full power to manage my assets. We also discovered he was involved in a larger real estate scheme, using my name and social security number as a front in suspicious transactions. Even more disturbing was discovering that it wasn't just me. At least 5 other elderly people, all parents of Michael's friends, were in a similar situation. A clear pattern was emerging, children using their elderly parents' names to carry out fraudulent financial operations, taking advantage of their trust, or in some cases, the cognitive decline that comes with age. This is an organized scheme, concluded David Jones, the U.S. attorney whom Marcia had contacted. We met in secret at his office, where he showed me folders with similar cases. Your son isn't acting alone. There are others involved, even in the banking system and public records. That's when I decided I needed a plan, not just to protect myself, but to expose the entire scheme, to seek justice. Not only for me, but for all the elderly people who are being exploited by their own children. Let's make him think he's winning, I suggested, during a meeting with Marcia, David, and Antonio Miller, my neighbor and former colleague who joined our small operation. We'll give him exactly what he wants, but in our own way. Thus, the deed plan was born. Michael had been insisting for months that I transfer the apartment to his name for reasons of security and succession planning. We decided to use this as bait. Dr. Laura Mendez, a lawyer specializing in real estate law and a former acquaintance from the FBI, prepared special documents. What appeared to be a simple property transfer was actually a carefully crafted set of documents. The real deed would never be transferred. There was a hidden clause in the legal fine print that kept me as a lifetime tenant and prevented any attempt to sell or mortgage the property without my express authorization. Most importantly, among the papers Michael had me sign, there was a document that, without his knowledge, was a detailed confession of the financial crimes he had been committing with my signature as a cooperating witness in a federal investigation. Meanwhile, we continued to gather evidence. Every bank movement, every forged document, every suspicious meeting with his accomplices, everything was meticulously documented. The operation took on greater proportions when we discovered connections to a money laundering scheme involving shell construction companies and overvalued land. Sarah, my granddaughter, would visit me in secret during that time. Christine and Michael would forbid her from seeing me, inventing excuses, saying I was confused and difficult to deal with. But she, with the rebelliousness of her 15 years, would escape after school to spend a few hours with me. Grandma, there's something strange going on. She confided to me one afternoon while we ate chocolate chip cookies I had baked especially for her. Dad and Mom are always whispering and closing out conversations on the computer when I walk into the room. And yesterday, I heard Mom talking about selling a Venice apartment as soon as the papers were ready. I felt my heart tighten. My own granddaughter was realizing something wasn't right, even without knowing exactly what. In that moment, I knew I was doing the right thing, not just for me, but also for Sarah. Honey, sometimes people make bad decisions thinking they are shortcuts to happiness, I said, carefully choosing my words. But in the end, those shortcuts lead to very different places than we imagine. I'm worried about you, Grandma, she confessed, her eyes filled with tears. Dad said you're moving far away. Don't you worry about me. Your grandma is stronger and smarter than she looks, I replied, hugging her. And I promise you that no matter what happens, I will always be here for you. In the weeks leading up to the deed signing, we intensified our preparations. David Jones ensured that the police operation was ready to be executed at the right time. David Miller supervised the installation of a more sophisticated monitoring system in the Venice apartment to record what would happen after my supposed departure. Marcia prepared a safe apartment in Brentwood, where I would stay during the critical phase of the operation. The day of the signing arrived. As I've already told you, Michael showed up with Christine and the documents. I signed each page, observing the barely disguised anxiety on their faces. And then came the phrase that, even though I was expecting it, still cut my heart like a knife. Get out of my life, old lady. I don't need you anymore. In the following days, I followed the plan to the letter. I packed a few things, let Michael take the furniture he wanted, and pretended to be defeated and resigned. On the day set for my departure, I left the keys with the doorman and left, supposedly for the house in Reseda. In reality, I went to the apartment in Brentwood, where we established our operations center. From there, with the help of Antonio, Marcia, and David, we continued to monitor Michael's every step. The hidden cameras in the Venice apartment showed him and Christine celebrating their victory, making plans to renovate and eventually sell the property. They have no idea what's coming, Antonio commented as we watched the images on one of the monitors. None. I confirmed with a serenity that surprised even myself. The operation was codenamed Operation Gratitude. A subtle irony that reflected what we were facing. Children who completely forgot the gratitude they owed to the parents who had given them everything. Over the next 6 months, we lived in a state of constant surveillance. The evidence accumulated. Michael expanded his scheme, using the Venice apartment as collateral for new fraudulent loans, bringing potential investors to see the property he planned to turn into a luxury project. We also discovered something that particularly outraged me. The money that Michael was supposedly saving for Sarah's college tuition was actually being diverted to offshore accounts. My granddaughter, who dreamed of going to medical school, was being deceived by her own parents. Sarah's visits continued, now at the Brentwood apartment. She was the only one who knew my true whereabouts and swore to keep the secret. Our conversations became a refuge for both of us, she escaping the tense atmosphere at home, me maintaining contact with the only person in the family who still truly mattered to me. Dad is planning a huge birthday party, she told me about 5 months after I'd moved out of the apartment. A rooftop in Manhattan with a view of the city. He's inviting everyone who's important in the real estate market. That information was the catalyst we had been waiting for. A birthday party with all his professional contacts, potential investors, and accomplices gathered in one place. The perfect setting for our operation. It's time, I told David Jones when we met to discuss the timing, Everyone will be there, relaxed, off guard. I agree, he responded, examining the invitation Sarah had secretly photographed for us. Besides, we have enough evidence. The warrants are ready. We meticulously planned every detail of what would happen that night. Police forces would be strategically positioned. Officers of the court would have the necessary documents. The video system would interrupt the party at the exact moment, and my surprise appearance would be on screens distributed throughout the venue. The night before the operation, I had a moment of doubt. Sitting on the balcony of the Brentwood apartment, looking at the city lights in the distance, I thought about all the implications of what we were about to do. Michael would go to jail. His reputation would be destroyed. Sarah would have to deal with the trauma of seeing her parents publicly exposed. We can still back down, Antonio said, noticing my restlessness as he brought me a cup of tea. We can look for a more private, less drastic solution. I shook my head slowly. This isn't just about me, Antonio. This is about all the other victims. All the elderly people who are being exploited by their children, with no one to turn to, with no resources or knowledge like mine. If we back down now, who will speak for them? He nodded in understanding. You've always been the bravest of us, Eleanor. That night, I reviewed old family photos. Michael as a child running on the Venice beach, a proud teenager with a swimming championship trophy, a young man at his graduation with a bright future ahead of him. At what point did the child I loved become the calculating man who now betrayed not only my trust, but that of so many others? Maybe I'll never find the answer to that question, but I knew that regardless of my love for him, justice had to prevail. Some lessons are only learned the hard way. The next morning, Operation Gratitude was ready to be executed. I was ready to reveal to everyone who Eleanor Johnson really was, not just a betrayed mother, but a woman who had dedicated her life to fighting precisely the kind of crime she was now suffering. The clock was ticking. Every minute brought us closer to the moment of truth. Adrenaline ran through my veins, mixed with pain and determination. I remembered the words of an old mentor at the FBI. Justice sometimes moves slowly, Eleanor, but it always reaches its destination. That night, justice would arrive at its destination on a rooftop in Manhattan, dressed as a birthday party. And my son would discover in the hardest way possible that some betrayals come with a very high price to pay. As I prepared, adjusting the pearl necklace my father had given me when I graduated from the police academy decades ago, I thought about all the other mothers who at that very moment were being manipulated, deceived, and discarded by ungrateful children. This operation would also be for all of them. It's time, David Jones announced, entering the room with the latest reports in hand. The forces are positioned. The video system is ready. I took a deep breath and nodded. The investigator, Eleanor Johnson, was back for her last and most important case. The moment of the reveal came with the precision of a Swiss watch. As I watched on the monitors in our operations room, I saw Michael raise his champagne glass, ready to give a speech to his guests. The smile on his face radiated the confidence of someone who believes they are above any consequence. It was exactly at that instant of illusory triumph that we began the operation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice amplified by the sound system of the elegant rooftop. "At 43, I can say that I have finally arrived. I appreciate everyone's presence at this special celebration." His words were suddenly interrupted when all the screens in the venue, the large decorative LED screens, the monitors at the bars, even the small screens on the information totems, went dark simultaneously. The background music ceased. creating a disconcerting silence that captured the attention of everyone present. And then my face appeared on every screen. "Hello, my son. Surprise." Even through the monitors in our control room, I could see the color drain from Michael's face. His eyes widened in a mixture of shock and terror. The glass he was holding slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor with a sound that seemed to resonate in the absolute silence that invaded the environment. "For those who don't know me," I continued on the recording, my voice calm and firm, filling the space. "I am Eleanor Johnson, mother of Michael Johnson, your host tonight. Months ago, I transferred the deed to my apartment in Venice into his name, or at least that's what he thought." The cameras captured the nervous movement of Michael's eyes, searching for a way out, an explanation, anything that could interrupt what was happening. Christine, at his side, gripped his arm tightly, her knuckles white against the dark fabric of his expensive Italian suit. "You asked me to get out of your life after I signed the deed. Get out of my life, old lady. I don't need you anymore." Those were your exact words, Michael. What you didn't know is that I already imagined this would happen. Through the communicator, I heard David report, "Teams positioned at all exits. Nobody leaves until we're done." On the screens, I could see the guests exchanging confused glances. Some began to discreetly distance themselves from Michael, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. "For years, I watched you and Christine use my name and social security number for money laundering operations." I continued on the recording as documents began to appear on the screens, replacing my face. Every forged document, every offshore account, every bribe in real estate schemes, everything was documented. The documents shown not only referred to the frauds against me, but also to the evidence of the larger scheme we had discovered. Suspicious bank transfers, fraudulent deeds, contracts with forged signatures of other elderly victims, a complete tapestry of financial crimes meticulously woven over the years. The deed I signed wasn't for the apartment, Michael. I revealed in the video, my face reappearing on the screens. It was a detailed confession of your crimes, with my signature as a cooperating witness in the federal investigation that began 3 years ago. It was at that moment that the rooftop doors opened, giving way to uniformed FBI agents led by David Jones. They positioned themselves strategically in the environment as the guests began to murmur among themselves, some already nervously searching for their bags and jackets. Through the monitors in our control room, I watched the exact moment when Sarah, my granddaughter, understood what was happening. She was standing near one of the canapé tables, the glass of soda frozen halfway to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the image of the grandmother everyone thought was relegated to a distant apartment in Reseda. How did you do this?" Michael stammered, speaking to the screens as if he could hear me in real time. As if responding directly to him, the video continued. "You forgot who I am, Michael. Before I was your mother, I was a financial crimes investigator for 3 decades. Did you really believe I wouldn't notice what was happening under my own roof?" David Jones approached Michael, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. "Michael Johnson," he announced in a professional and detached voice, "you are under arrest for the crimes of fraud, money laundering, falsification of documents, misappropriation, and criminal conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." As David recited the constitutional rights, 2 agents positioned themselves beside Michael. Christine tried to walk away, moving discreetly toward one of the side exits, but she was intercepted by a female agent who had been expecting that move. "Christine Alves," the agent announced. "You are also under arrest for the same crimes." The controlled chaos that followed was exactly as we had planned. The agents identified and arrested each of the accomplices present at the party. Roger Mendonca, the real estate broker, Edward Peterson, the bank manager who facilitated the fraudulent transactions, and Daniel Adams, the public registrar who recorded documents without verifying their authenticity. Through the monitors in our control room, I watched the scene unfold like a meticulously rehearsed play. Some guests, realizing they were not directly involved, tried to leave discreetly, only to be informed by the agents at the exits that everyone would have to give a statement as a witness. "Get Sarah," I told Marcia through the communicator. "She needs support now." Marcia, who was positioned among the guests as a fake waitress, confirmed and moved discreetly toward my granddaughter, who remained motionless, as if her feet were glued to the floor. My attention was focused on Michael when the screen showed the final moment of my message. "I gave you everything, Michael, even the opportunity to be honest. You chose this path." The monitors showed Michael being handcuffed, the initial shock giving way to impotent rage. "You can't do this to me," he yelled at the screens, as if I could respond. "I'm your son, your only son." "And you are the son who chose to betray his own mother," David replied, not for me, but expressing what everyone in the room was thinking. "Let's go, Mr. Johnson. Don't make this any harder than it already is." Christine, unlike Michael, maintained a calculated calm, as if she were already evaluating her legal options. Her cold eyes scanned the environment, probably identifying who could help her later. When her gaze met Sarah's, I saw something rare on her face, a flash of qualm, quickly replaced by the mask of indifference she also wore. It was then that I decided it was time to appear in person. "I'm heading down," I informed the team through the communicator. "Are you sure?" Antonio asked, with evident concern in his voice. "We can conclude the operation without your physical presence." "I'm sure," I replied with determination. "Sarah needs to see me, and so does Michael." I adjusted my pearl necklace, checked my reflection in the mirror of the operations room, and took a deep breath. This would be the most difficult confrontation of my life, more challenging than any operation I had coordinated at the FBI. When the elevator doors opened on the rooftop, the murmur of voices gradually diminished until an absolute silence took over the environment. I walked with firm steps, the upright posture I had maintained throughout my career, my eyes fixed ahead. Michael, already handcuffed and about to be led away, froze when he saw me. His face went through a succession of emotions: shock, confusion, rage, and finally, something that seemed to be a flash of belated understanding. "How?" he started to ask, but the words seemed to fail him. I stopped a few steps away, maintaining a dignity that contrasted with his current state. Messy hair, a crooked tie, sweat staining the collar of his expensive shirt. "You underestimated me, Michael," I said simply, my voice calm, filling the tense silence. Just as many people underestimate the elderly. They mistake white hair for fragility, wrinkles for inability, and experience for obsolescence. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that several guests were discreetly recording the scene with their phones. Tomorrow, this would be news in all the newspapers, shared infinitely on social media. The public humiliation was part of the punishment, but it was not my primary goal. "Why?" I asked, the only question that truly mattered. "Why betray the person who always gave you everything?" Michael looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "You wouldn't understand," he mumbled, the arrogance still persisting even in defeat. "Try me," I insisted, remaining calm. "I think I at least deserve that." He took a deep breath, finally meeting my eyes. It was too easy, he confessed with a brutal honesty that surprised me. You and everyone else, so trusting, so willing to believe the best in people, so vulnerable. His words confirmed what Dr. Collins had explained about the mindset of these criminals. It wasn't just greed, it was the ease of exploitation, the power they felt in manipulating others, especially those they were supposed to protect. I understood, and I really did understand. I didn't agree. I never could. But I understood the psychological mechanics behind his actions. I hope it was worth it, I said, a final note of sorrow in my voice. Before he could respond, I felt a quick movement beside me. Sarah had finally come out of her state of shock and was now running toward me. Her arms wrapped around me in a tight hug, her body trembling with contained sobs. "Grandma," she murmured against my shoulder. I knew something was wrong. I just knew it. I hugged her back, feeling a wave of maternal protection that extended from my son to my granddaughter. "It's all right now, honey," I reassured her, gently pulling away to look into her eyes. "You'll come with me now. Everything is already arranged." The panicked look that crossed Christine's face at this was almost imperceptible, but my years of training allowed me to catch it. "She's our daughter!" Christine protested, fighting against the handcuffs that restricted her movements. "You can't just take her away." "Actually, she can," Dr. Laura Mendez interjected, who had just arrived on the rooftop. My lawyer approached with confident steps, a folder of documents in hand. "I have here a provisional custody order signed by the family court judge 3 hours ago. Given the criminal circumstances involving both parents, Sarah will be in her maternal grandmother's custody until the final judgment." The look Christine gave Alora was one of pure hatred, but there was nothing she could do. The net we had woven around them was inescapable, every detail meticulously planned. "This isn't over," Michael threatened as the agents began to lead him away. "I have connections. I have money." "No, Michael, it isn't over," I corrected him kindly. "Your connections are being arrested at this very moment in simultaneous operations throughout the city. And as for the money," I paused meaningfully. "All the assets acquired with illicit funds are already blocked and in the process of judicial confiscation, including the Venice apartment, which, I must remind you, never legally stopped being mine." The understanding of the magnitude of his defeat finally seemed to reach him. His shoulders dropped, the mask of confidence crumbling completely. "Let's go, Mr. Johnson," David insisted, with a professional kindness that somehow made everything more devastating. "Your lawyers can meet you at the FBI headquarters." As he was led away, Michael looked back one last time. Our gazes met in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. I saw in him the child he once was, the son I loved unconditionally, now lost in a maze of greed and self-deception. "Mom," he began, but the words seemed to fail him. "I know," I replied simply. And then he was gone, led by the agents toward the elevator, along with Christine and the other detainees. The remaining guests began to organize themselves to give their testimonies, many of them seeming relieved to be just on the sidelines of the scandal. Sarah remained by my side, her hand firmly holding mine, as if she feared I might disappear again. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Now we go home," I replied, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "We have a lot to talk about, a lot to process, but we'll do it together." Marcia approached, bringing Sarah's coat. "The car is waiting in the back," she informed me discreetly to avoid the press that was already beginning to gather at the main entrance. I thanked her with a nod and began to guide Sarah toward the service exit. As we walked, I noticed the glances of the remaining guests, some of admiration, others of curiosity, many of a newfound respect for the woman whom everyone had presumed to be just a disposable old mother. In the service elevator, Sarah finally verbalized the question that must have been consuming her. "You knew what they were doing the whole time, didn't you?" I looked at my granddaughter, seeing in her the intelligence and integrity I hoped I had helped cultivate, even from a distance. Not from the beginning, I confessed honestly. But when I started to realize, I did what I've always done throughout my career. I investigated, gathered evidence, and built a solid case. They really thought they had succeeded. A small smile appeared on my lips. Your father was always impatient with details. He never read contracts all the way through. He never checked the fine print. A fatal flaw for someone in his field. The elevator reached the ground floor, and we were quickly led through a service hallway to the back exit, where a discreet car was waiting for us. Antonio was behind the wheel, a relieved smile on his face as he saw us. "Mission accomplished, Eleanor," he said as he opened the back door for us. "Almost," I replied, helping Sarah into the vehicle. "We still have a long way to go." As the car drove away from the hotel, I saw in the rear-view mirror the flashing lights of the police cars, the flashes of the photographers already positioned at the main entrance, the beginning of the media spectacle that would undoubtedly follow. Tomorrow, the story would be in all the headlines. Retired investigator unmasks her own son's scheme. Elderly woman turns the tables on family fraud. Operation Gratitude exposes network of elder exploitation. But in that moment, in that silent car, driving through the Los Angeles night, we were just a grandmother and a granddaughter, two generations united by blood and now by the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice sounding a little firmer now. "Home," I replied, gently squeezing her hand, "to the place where you will always be welcome, no matter what." And as Antonio drove toward Brentwood, toward the apartment that would become Sarah's new home, I finally felt the weight of the last 6 months begin to dissipate. Justice had been done, not just for me, but for all the other victims who had no voice and no means to defend themselves. The consequences of Operation Gratitude were not long in manifesting. The morning after the party, I woke up before dawn. After a restless night, Sarah was still sleeping soundly in the guest room I had prepared especially for her. Pastel-colored walls, a small desk by the window with a view of the Brentwood Hills, and some of our photographs in delicate frames. I did everything I could to make her feel welcome, even in the midst of the whirlwind that our lives had become. I made a pot of strong coffee and walked out to the balcony where the first rays of sun were beginning to gild the horizon. The morning paper had already been delivered, and as expected, our story dominated the front page. Retired investigator dismantles her own son's scheme. The photograph showed Michael being led away in handcuffs toward the police car, his face contorted in an expression that mixed anger and despair. Beside it, an archival photo of me from my time at the FBI, serious and composed in my uniform. Reading that report gave me contradictory feelings. There was a professional satisfaction in seeing a complex case resolved with precision, like so many others in my career. But there was also the indescribable pain of a mother seeing her only son publicly exposed for crimes she herself helped to reveal. There is no manual for navigating this kind of internal conflict. The phone rang insistently all morning. Journalists, TV shows, forgotten acquaintances, everyone wanting their share of the sensational story of the investigative grandmother. I instructed Marcia, who arrived early to help us, to filter the calls. The only one I allowed to go through was from Dr. Collins, the psychologist who had assisted us during the operation. "How is Sarah?" was his first question. His calm voice conveyed genuine concern. "She's still sleeping," I replied, lowering my voice as I moved toward the office. "She was physically and emotionally exhausted. And you, Eleanor, how are you coping with everything?" I hesitated before answering, allowing myself, for the first time since everything began, to acknowledge the emotional weight I was carrying. "I'm processing. One part of me feels like I betrayed my own son. The other knows I did what was necessary." "Both parts are right," he observed kindly. "There are no simple answers to moral dilemmas like this. The important thing now is to take care of Sarah and yourself. The trauma can manifest in unexpected ways in the coming days." Following his advice, we arranged for therapy sessions for Sarah 3 times a week, and also for me because justice without healing is just another form of punishment. He reminded me before we hung up. His words stayed with me as I prepared a substantial breakfast, anticipating that Sarah would wake up hungry after the emotional whirlwind of the night before. Around 10 a.m., David Jones called with official updates. The operation had been a complete success, with 19 arrests made simultaneously at various locations in LA. The scheme was even larger than we had imagined, involving employees from 3 different registries and 2 high-level bank managers. More than 30 elderly people had been identified as victims up to that point. Many of them weren't even aware that their properties had been fraudulently transferred. "Michael and Christine are being transferred to a federal detention center this afternoon," David reported. "The custody hearing was held this morning. Given the seriousness of the crimes and the risk of obstructing justice, pretrial detention was maintained." A federal detention center. Now my own son would be there in a cell, wearing the gray uniform of inmates, subject to the same severe rules I had helped impose on so many other criminals. The irony was not lost on me. "Michael asked to speak with you," David added after a pause. "It's not mandatory, of course. The decision is entirely yours." This information took me by surprise. What would Michael want to say now? More accusations, desperate pleas, empty promises of repentance? "I'll think about it," I finally replied. "Right now, my priority is Sarah." As if my words had invoked her, I heard my granddaughter's soft steps in the hallway. I thanked David and hung up, quickly composing a more serene expression. Sarah appeared at the kitchen door, still in the pajamas we had bought in a hurry the night before. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen from crying. She seemed simultaneously younger and older than her 15 years, the vulnerability of a child mixed with the premature understanding of adult truths. "Good morning, honey," I greeted her, trying to maintain a tone of normalcy that seemed absurdly inappropriate given the circumstances. "I made pancakes. Are they still your favorite?" She nodded in silence, sitting at the kitchen table. I served a generous plate and placed it in front of her, along with a pitcher of freshly squeezed orange juice. I watched as she ate mechanically, as if her body recognized the need for nourishment even though her mind was somewhere else. "It's in the papers, isn't it?" she finally asked without looking up from her plate. There was no point in hiding it. "Yes, on the front page," I nodded. Sarah swallowed again as if confirming something she already knew. "The girls at school will see it. Everyone will know." The reality of the social consequences for Sarah hit me hard. She wasn't just the daughter of newly exposed criminals. She was a teenager in the midst of forming her identity, for whom the perception of her peers weighed enormously. "We can transfer you to another school if you prefer," I suggested. Maybe even to another neighborhood. To my surprise, Sarah shook her head firmly. No, I'm not going to hide. I didn't do anything wrong. Her eyes, so much like mine, finally met mine. You taught me this, Grandma, that we have to face the truth, no matter how difficult it is. The pride I felt at that moment was so intense, it almost overshadowed the pain of the last few months. In the midst of all the dishonesty, my granddaughter had chosen the path of integrity. Perhaps this was the true legacy I would leave, not through the son I lost to greed, but through the granddaughter who inherited my sense of justice. The following days passed in a makeshift routine. Sarah began sessions with Dr. Collins, who kindly came to the apartment to avoid public exposure. I alternated between meetings with lawyers, providing additional statements to the FBI, and having long conversations with Laura Mendez about the legal implications of everything that had happened. The blocked assets are being evaluated, Laura explained during one of our meetings. Many will have to be sold to compensate the victims, but your Venice apartment is safe just as we planned. The lifetime tenancy clause worked perfectly. And what about the house in Reseda? I asked, thinking of the small property I had inherited from my parents. That's safe too. Michael never included it in his schemes, probably because he considered it to have little commercial value. I nodded, feeling an unexpected relief. That modest house held precious memories of my childhood. Sunday lunches with my parents, afternoons playing in the small yard, the birds singing in the old trees. It was a piece of my history that had remained untouched by Michael's greed. On the third night after the operation, while Sarah was sleeping, I received a visit from Antonio. Since everything began, he had been my most constant support, my confidant, my partner in this improbable mission. We sat on the balcony with 2 cups of tea, watching the city lights reflected on the dark sea. Have you decided if you're going to visit him? He asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. He didn't need to ask whom he was referring to. Not yet. One part of me wants to confront him, to demand explanations. Another part fears that there is no satisfactory answer for what he did. Antonio nodded in understanding. There's no rush for that decision, Eleanor. You've been brave enough for a lifetime. I looked at this man who had been by my side in the most difficult moments and felt a wave of gratitude. Antonio had been my colleague at the FBI for 2 decades, my neighbor for almost the same amount of time. And now, in this unexpected phase of life, something more, a safe harbor in the middle of a storm. I think I need to see him, I confessed finally. Not for him, but for me, to close this chapter properly. Antonio covered my hand with his, a simple gesture of support that said more than words. When you decide to go, you don't have to do it alone. The next morning, after leaving Sarah in Marcia's care, I drove to the Federal Detention Center. The procedure for visits was rigorous. Identification, search, long waits in gray, impersonal hallways. Every step in that place brought back memories of my professional visits in the past, when I was on the other side of the equation, interrogating suspects, gathering statements. Michael was brought into the visiting room with his hands cuffed, wearing the institution's gray uniform. The contrast with the elegant man at the birthday party couldn't be more shocking. His face showed clear signs of sleepless nights, and there was a new line between his eyebrows that hadn't been there before. "Mom," he said when he saw me, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "You came." "I came," I confirmed, sitting in the metal chair across from him. "You asked to see me." The guard placed himself discreetly in a corner of the room, giving us the illusion of privacy, though we both knew every word would be heard and recorded. "How is Sarah?" he asked, surprising me with his first concern. She's handling the situation better than one could expect. And you? He observed, with what seemed to be genuine admiration. I never imagined you could do what you did. That was your mistake, Michael, underestimating me, just as many people underestimate the elderly. He lowered his gaze, a rare gesture of submission I had never seen in him as an adult. I wanted to apologize, but I know there are no excuses for what I did. No, there aren't, I agreed, keeping my voice firm. It's not just about me. There were other people, other elderly people that you and your associates exploited, people who trusted their own children, like I trusted you. I know. He ran his hands over his face, a gesture restricted by the handcuffs. It started small, you know? A power of attorney here, a bank account there, and then it got easier and easier. That's how corruption works, I observed, remembering similar cases I had investigated. Small moral deviations that, if not confronted, grow into monstrosities we barely recognize. Michael looked up, meeting my gaze for the first time since he entered the room. What's going to happen now? You'll face a trial. The evidence is irrefutable. Will there be a conviction? I know. I'm asking about you and Sarah, about us. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications. What remains of a family after a betrayal of such magnitude? What kind of relationship could we have after what happened? I don't know, Michael, I replied honestly. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely, but I know that Sarah still needs a father, even if it's an imperfect one, and you will always be my son, even if you've become someone I barely recognize. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? He asked, in a voice so soft it was almost inaudible. I considered the question carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't something that's granted once and for all, Michael. It's a process, often long and painful. I can't promise we'll get there, but I can promise I won't completely close that door. Our time was running out. The guard approached, indicating that the visit was ending. Before I got up, I looked at my son one last time, the child I had cradled on feverish nights, the rebellious teenager who had tested my limits, the man who chose the path of dishonesty. Sarah asked if you're going to change, I said. I told her I didn't know. That change only comes when we recognize our mistakes. The choice, as always, is yours. I left the detention center with mixed feelings, sadness for what we had lost, relief for having said what needed to be said, and uncertainty about the future of our complicated family relationship. The LA sky was a particularly clear blue that morning, an almost cruel contrast to the gray atmosphere I had most left behind. 2 weeks after the operation, as the dust began to settle, I received an unexpected call. It was Mrs. Rose, an 80-year-old lady who lived in the same Venice building and who, I later discovered, had also been a victim of a similar scheme perpetrated by her nephew. Mrs. Johnson, she said, her voice trembling with emotion, I wanted to personally thank you for what you did. Thanks to your courage, my nephew confessed everything, and I am getting my apartment back. Her gratitude was followed by many others. As the details of the operation were made public, letters, emails, and calls began to pour in, dozens of elderly people and their families expressing gratitude for the exposure of the scheme that had harmed so many. It was then that I had an idea. With the help of Laura, David, and Antonio, I began to organize meetings with other victims. At first, they were just informal chats at cafes or in my apartment, where we shared experiences and information on how to navigate the complicated legal processes to recover properties and resources. Gradually, those meetings evolved into something more structured. 3 months after Operation Gratitude, we founded the Active Mind Institute, dedicated to the financial and emotional protection of the elderly. Using part of the resources recovered from the fraudulent schemes and legally designated for victim compensation, we rented a small commercial space where we began to offer free legal advice, psychological support, and educational workshops on the rights of the elderly. Sarah, to my surprise and pride, became an enthusiastic volunteer at the Institute. After school, she would come straight there, helping to organize events, talking with the elderly, and absorbing stories and wisdom that school could never offer. "I think I want to study law when I finish high school," she confessed to me one afternoon as we were organizing materials for a talk on preventing financial fraud, just like Dr. Mendez. "I want to help people who can't defend themselves." Her comment brought tears to my eyes. In the midst of all the pain and disappointment, something beautiful and meaningful was being born. The Institute grew, gained recognition, and attracted professional volunteers willing to contribute their time and knowledge. What began as a reaction to a personal betrayal was transforming into a movement for the protection and empowerment of the elderly. In the 6th month after the Institute's founding, we organized a special event at the Getty Center. The room was packed. Elderly people, their families, legal professionals, psychologists, social workers, and even some politicians interested in associating their images with the cause. On stage, I shared our story unfiltered, speaking openly about Michael's betrayal, about how I used my professional experience to dismantle the scheme, and how that painful experience had transformed into a purpose. Old age is not synonymous with fragility or obsolescence, I emphasized, looking at the attentive faces in the audience. It's an accumulation of experience, wisdom, and yes, strength. What happened to me, and to so many others here today, was not because we were weak or naive. It was because we trusted the wrong people, often those who were supposed to protect us. At the end of the talk, dozens of people came up to share their own stories. Among them, I noticed an elegant lady who was waiting patiently for her turn. When she finally approached, I recognized her immediately. She was Christine's mother, Sarah's paternal grandmother, Mrs. Jones. "Mrs. Johnson," she began hesitantly, "we never had the chance to truly know each other despite sharing a granddaughter. I wanted to say that I deeply admire your courage and that, well, I am so sorry for what my daughter and your son did." Her unexpected apology moved me. She was not obligated to take responsibility for her daughter's actions, but there she was, extending a hand in reconciliation. "Sarah talks about you a lot," she continued. "I would like to get to know my granddaughter better if possible." At that moment, I realized that healing came in unexpected ways, through connections that transcended resentment and pain. "Of course," I replied, feeling a new door open. Sarah would love to have her Grandma Rose more present in her life. 2 years have passed since the night Operation Gratitude was activated. Michael is still serving his sentence, although he has begun a victim restitution program, collaborating with authorities to identify other similar schemes. Sarah and I visit him from time to time, maintaining a cautious relationship, but one not without hope. The Active Mind Institute now occupies an entire floor in a commercial building in downtown LA, serving hundreds of elderly people every month and inspiring similar initiatives in other American cities. Sarah, about to graduate from high school, has already been accepted into law school, determined to follow in the footsteps of Dr. Laura Mendez, who has become her mentor and friend. As for Antonio and me, our relationship has naturally evolved from friendship to something deeper. At 70, I have rediscovered the pleasure of companionship, of complicity, of affection that is built on a foundation of mutual respect and admiration. Looking back at that fateful afternoon when I heard my son's cruel words and saw the apartment I had worked so hard for being taken, I realized that what seemed to be the end was, in reality, a new beginning. The betrayal that should have destroyed me ended up revealing a strength I didn't even know I possessed. Today, as I watch the sunset from the balcony of my recovered Venice apartment, with Sarah studying at the table next to me and Antonio preparing dinner in the kitchen, I feel a peace that I believed was impossible in those dark days. The wound still hurts occasionally, as deep wounds do, but we have learned to live with the scars, transforming them into marks of a battle that, against all odds, we won. And if there is one lesson I would like to share with those who hear my story, it is this. Never underestimate the power of an elderly woman with determination, experience, and an unshakable sense of justice. Because when they challenge us, when they try to discard us as irrelevant, that is precisely when we reveal the extraordinary strength that a lifetime of experiences has granted us. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace? Or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.